for the BC Conservative Party. He spent his career in the private sector, building companies, working across industries, and operating in an environment where results actually matter, where failure isn't theoretical, it's immediate. And that's the case he's making in this race. Yuri, welcome.
Thanks, Dan. Good to be here.
Some people would say that you're a disruptor. Would you say you're a disruptor?
I don't get up in the morning to be a disruptor for the sake of it, right? But there are systems that are broken. And so when the system is broken, we can either keep allowing the system to be broken, or we can actually disrupt what we're doing and actually make change. So if that's what a disruptor is, I guess I am. That's how I come to politics is, and we talked about this before we went on the air, the system is broken. In British Columbia, it is tragically broken. And, somebody needs to jump in and fix it. We can all yell at the radio, we can all throw our shoe at the TV, but we actually got to do something. And so if that makes me a disruptor here, I guess I'm the disruptor, and I'm okay with that.
Well, I say that in a good way because I look at your resume and 30 years old, you were building an empire, and you seem to be a self-starter. And imagine a lot of people told you you couldn't build an empire, and so let's dive into that. What part of because obviously there's a lot of people that said no, and obviously that a lot of people said you shouldn't jump into this race. What drives you forward?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. So I would say of every major decision I've ever made in my life, and entering this leadership race is for sure one of them. The majority of people in your life tell you no. It's uncomfortable, right? And most people wouldn't do it. So I kind of go almost on the measure, if enough people tell me I shouldn't do it, maybe that's actually the reason I should do it. So, I'm good with that. I think most people, judge what others should do by what they'd be comfortable doing themselves. And I go a bit of the other way, which is, where is my comfort zone? And maybe I'm naive, but I think I'm just a bit braver.
Respectfully, no, and I have to respect that because I think that what we need in this province is a little bit of bravery, people that are willing to do things that are going to be hard, and I think that's what people in this province are striving for. I think that you look at this deficit, you look at the people that are leaving this province, the unemployment, the wait times in healthcare. I think that people want some change, and they know that the status quo is not working. Early on in this campaign, it kind of looked like this was going to be a very friendly campaign, and it almost seemed like nobody was going to, we're going to all be friends. Don't criticize me, I won't criticize you. And that, like to me, I saw that, and it seemed like that really benefits the people with records, the people that don't really want to have anything, shown to public. And you've kind of come out swinging, and a fair criticism you made was to Caroline Elliott. You called her the vice president of the BC United under Kevin Falcon. You pointed out that she kept donating to them even after a near miss election. And you even released a video of yourself eating an A&W burger, basically saying she was pretending to be a conservative. You said if you don't have the stomach for the values and you don't brag about how you're conservative, that this party needs to be protected from a liberal takeover. Do you mind diving into that a little bit for me?
Yeah, for sure. So, a leadership contest is not a beauty pageant, right? We don't all stand up and, put on pretty outfits and, tell people that we're going to create world peace, right? It's not that. We have to contrast with each other, right? How else do the members choose if there isn't contrast between us? So I think that that's always fair, and I'm happy to be the recipient of contrast. That happens as well. What I joined when I ran in 2024, I joined a conservative party to run as a conservative. Some others did too, right? There are other leadership contestants who did that too. There are some that did not. So, my question to anybody who wasn't on the ballot in 2024 was, where were you? So you want the boss's job now, right? Like you want to come and lead the Conservative Party. Where were you when we were polling at 12, 14, 18, 20% in 2024? Why weren't you on the ballot then?
Right. That's a fair question.
You've got some reasons. I don't know what they are. But I think that's the question members should be asking, is when we were down and we needed people and we needed good candidates on the ballot, where were you? I know where I was.
It's a fair question. we can, and I think records matter in terms of, where you were on the issues. I think that you can be right on one issue, but let's be clear, if you're right on one issue, like let's say Cowichan, but you were the champion of Soji, you're champion of the party that pushed carbon taxes, Soji, you know, a lot of this stuff that we got into this era, that this mess that we caused, those records matter. And I think, we can bring that comment back to, one of your competitors was talking about, Soji, and she mentioned that, this views on, Lauren Thronis, he had an opposition to Soji, and he questioned maybe we should be doing counseling to these people rather than doing, surgeries that are permanent to these children. And she came out and she said that, that those views are abhorrent. And then we go full circle, and we need to repeal it. Well, where were your principles on 4-6 years ago? Where were your principles then? What are your thoughts on being in the room, saying, like, championing those issues, but also being in the room when you were also talking, like when the past leader John Rustad was kicked out of the party for talking about climate change? Like, what are your thoughts on records and why they matter?
Yeah, so I'll say two things. I think everybody needs to stand by what they've said and be held accountable for what they've said. True wisdom, though, is also being able to say, I believed something once, I have new information, and I have changed my opinion on it. Right? That's
Right.
true wisdom, is I'm still open to listening and learning, and
Right.
I've been convinced that something else is now true. What I think is unacceptable is people who had a view and now pretend they didn't have that view. At least walk us from one to the other. So if you've
I
changed
agree with
your
that.
mind, that's fine. But tell us, I was wrong then, but I've got new information now, and here's what I think today. And I can stomach that.
I
Absolutely
can
stomach that. But
I
what
can
I
respect
can't
that,
stomach
Yuri.
is pretend you didn't have that view back then. That actually pisses me off.
And one thing I will say to you is thank you for coming on. Not all of the candidates came on and accepted our interview, and I respect that you came on here, because if you're going to give it, you're going to get it. So I respect you for coming on here. Talking about disruption, and the reason I brought up the disruption, um, you know, and you being a disruptor and you shaking things up. Just yesterday, you signed the Unite the Right Accord with Dallas Brody and her One BC party. You agreed that if you win the leadership, the Conservative will step aside in 5 ridings, so one BC can run there. They'll stay out of the other 88, and they'll give you confidence and supply deal to prop up a Conservative government. Walk us through it. Walk us through the Dallas Brody of it all.
Yeah, so here I come at this from a very business, very pragmatic point of view, right? To me, this is about defeating the NDP. I am running with the sole purpose of defeating the NDP at the next election and putting a Conservative government in power. Like, that is what I am here to do. Everything else comes after defeating the NDP and putting a Conservative government in power. So I'm looking at 1BC's polling numbers, and whatever poll you look at, they're either in the high single digits or they're touching double-digit polling numbers. We can either bury our head in the sand and pretend that's not true or pretend it's going to go away, or we can say to ourselves, that will cost us the election. Because if 1BC polls more than 3.5%, mathematically the Conservative Party cannot win an election. Right? They still won't win a seat at that, but mathematically we won't win the election. So that's unacceptable to me. It's unacceptable that we can't win an election, especially given all of what you said. Healthcare wait times, huge deficit, safety on the streets is zero. Given all of that, can you imagine an NDP government getting back in? So Dallas and I got together. Dallas is a proud British Columbian. I'm a proud British Columbian. Dallas wants to defeat the NDP. I want to defeat the NDP. We made a pact that, she will stand down in 88 ridings, right? 88 ridings. She'll stand down and not challenge a Conservative candidate, which gives us the ability to win. And in return, we'll stand down in 5 ridings so that Dallas and 1BC can maintain their party. I think it is a fair deal in the context that it will cause a Conservative government to get elected in British Columbia. And everybody else who wants to go through some kind of weird, well, it's got to be, they're all talking about uniting the right of centre and uniting the Conservative movement and uniting the blue tent, and everybody's got a narrative on that. Sorry, folks, I went out and did it yesterday. I went out and united the right yesterday. It's done. So everybody else is talking about it. Everybody else was wishing 1BC would go away and didn't exist. That was very naive of them. Like, it was almost putting their own ego before the party and before British Columbia. But I went out and got it done. And every now and then I get accused that I'm new to politics and I don't understand how politics works. Well, I seemed to work it out yesterday, and we got a deal done.
Love it. I love it. What did the like? Did you get any nasty phone calls from the Conservative board?
Not yet.
No, yeah, that's fair enough. So
I don't know what the issue is, though, folks. Like, I look at some of the ridings that we won, and in the last election we won a bunch of ridings. Like, we came this close, right? This close. We came this close, and 1BC didn't exist then. So I looked down those list of ridings that we won by so we won some ridings by 90 votes, right? And less. We won some ridings by hundreds of votes. If 1BC was in play in those ridings, we would lose them.
Yeah, so, you're absolutely right.
We would lose them. I mean, it's just math. Like, this isn't
49%. Yeah, 49%. That's something you can't ignore. And respectfully, I think it's great. I think a lot of people that are disenfranchised that see Dallas Brody as someone that makes a lot of sense to them. That's very straight and forward talking. That brings the issues that many people in British Columbia want to talk about, but it seems like the political class doesn't want to talk about. I think this gives them an option, and I respect you for doing it. Let's talk a little.
Democracy, Dan, right? This is about democracy. So
right.
People are entitled to vote for whoever they want to vote for. I might not agree with the voting choices they made. I don't agree with the choices people made in the last election.
No.
So, people are entitled to vote for who they want to vote for. Sort of, naively saying, well, I'm sure that'll go away. I'm sure that these people who are angry and supporters of Dallas, and, they legitimately support Dallas, that they'll go away somehow. Like, that's disrespectful to their right to vote for who they want to vote for. And what I loved about this deal Dallas and I did is Dallas keeps her party. She's going to continue being the leader of 1BC. 1BC will set the policy that they want to set. They'll have the discussion with voters that they want to have. And if people choose to vote for them in those 5 ridings, that's what people will choose. But what it won't do is cause us to split the right of centre vote. We're not going to ask 1BC folks to have to make choices between the Conservatives and 1BC. We're going to ask Conservatives to vote Conservative, and folks in 1BC can vote for 1BC. So we'll have our Conservative Party politics, Conservative Party agenda, and we'll do what we need to do. And Dallas will do what she needs to do with 1BC. So it's a parallel track. And I think ultimately, and I know it will, this will cause us to win the next election. And I despair that if I'm not elected leader, Dallas won't do this deal with anybody else. If I'm not elected leader, this split vote will cost the Conservatives at the next election. We'll lose.
And if we look at the Google trends, it looks like you've been had a lot of support. I mean, I look at your socials just today, and you said you had breaking numbers. So it seems like you're getting a lot of grassroots support for this PAC. So I think that the numbers won't lie at the end of this.
It was an unbelievable day yesterday, Dan. Like, we raised more money than we've ever raised. We had more members come in than we've ever seen come in. Our social response was overwhelming. And I mean, there are always haters, but it was 9.5 times out of 10, it was positive. And the number of donations that came in like this, it was people saying, I wish I could give you more, but this is all I have to spare. And it came in $15 at a time, $25 at a time, $100 at a time, $200. Came from every riding in British Columbia with people saying, I wish I could give you more, but in these times, this is all I got. And so I'm truly blessed that we're doing what British Columbians want us to do.
Well, I'm glad that you're giving them an outlet, and obviously you're giving some of these British Columbians hope, and I think that that's important. I've been to a lot of these leadership campaigns, and I talk to a lot of the people that go there, and I ask them, what their story is, and a lot of stories is like, I'm here, I want to donate money, but I can't. I can barely afford my groceries. I can barely afford rent. Take me a little bit through that. With the cost of living crisis that we're currently living through here in BC. We have 3 issues when it comes to housing. Obviously a lack of supply that's been identified by the Bank of Canada since COVID, and we have an issue with permitting, and then we also have an issue with immigration. You know, the immigration part is we just don't have enough supply, and you know, it brings up the cost of what we have on the ground level. Right now, we also have the business community, you know, clamoring for work. For we need immigrants to supply these jobs. Young people don't want to work them, but at the same point in time, we have a generation that has massive unemployment, and at the same point in time, we have you know, a business community that says like, well, they don't want to work, but these people probably don't want to work because they see no future in this province. So how do you reconcile all three? Because obviously you have a permitting issue here in Vancouver. You know, the cost to build is expensive, but you also have a supply and demand issue at the same time. And then you have to balance the business needs. So I know it's a bit of a thread, but walk me through your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so a lot going on in there, and you're absolutely right. I think it starts with the cost of housing is being driven by government, right? So it's both taxes, development charges. You know, government just added PST to, you know, consultants and engineers and architects, so it just makes the cost high. So we're being told now that about a third of the cost of building an apartment or a townhouse is government fees, taxes, development charges, etc. So the driver of unaffordability in housing is government, right? Full stop, it's government. So the good news is government can stop doing some of those things and get out of that and drive the cost down. Same with you and whether it's, you know, for every individual in British Columbia, your biggest expense isn't housing, it's taxes. The biggest chunk of your salary or your paycheck goes to the government. So I'm a conservative because I believe in smaller government. I believe in conservative values as well, but I fundamentally believe in smaller government. And the good news is, the smaller the size of government, the more of your taxes you get back. And I get really sick when I hear governments talk about government money. No such thing as government money. Margaret Thatcher said it. There is no government money. There's only taxpayers' money. That's it. Every dollar the government spends, it goes to the taxpayers to get. Or it borrows it on behalf of the taxpayers, and the taxpayers are going to have to pay it back another time. We've got to get out of this mindset that government money is some sort of magic money. It's not. It's taxpayers' money. So everything you see the government doing, you think to yourself, am I okay funding that personally? Because that's what you're doing. You are funding it personally. So am I okay with that? How do I feel about that? So when you see a new government program or a project going on, or you see thousands of civil servants being hired, or whatever you see, remember that you're paying for part of it. And I think that's the needle we need to thread. I do think there are parts of British Columbia that do need some immigration, whether it's temporary or more permanent. There are resort communities where there is just no labor and seasonally no labor. I can tell you I operate a number of A&Ws. We're in some towns where the population of the town is 1,500 people. In summer, I need 85 of them. Right? I literally need 5% of the population of the town. So does every other fast food place in town. There's just not enough. But that's not the whole province. So I think we need to start thinking about immigration much more regionally. Right? What are the places and the roles? So it's not a blanket, we need X number of people all over the province. Where do we need them? In what roles do we need them? And how do we best do that? So, and I think that goes, then we can work out what supply and demand for housing looks like in that context. But we've got to get government out of the cost of housing. So it's about permit. You mentioned permitting. A 2-3 year delay in a permit costs developers money. Well, who pays for that? The developer doesn't end up paying for it. The home buyer pays for it. Right? If the developer gets hit with more taxes, the home buyer pays more taxes. So we've got to get the government out of the time and the cost of building housing.
No, respectfully, I absolutely agree with that. And one thing, and I'm glad you addressed the temporary worker program, because I've heard the criticisms from your opponents towards you on terms of why you use temporary workers programs when you were criticizing immigration. So thanks for threading that needle for me. I appreciate that, because it does make a lot of sense. It's like, if you want to operate a business and you don't have the community to do it, and it's not just you. I've heard this from bakers. I've heard this from people that are growing crops, is that we need temporary foreign workers to sustain our economy. Fair enough. Let me ask you a question about, coastal First Nations. You put out a video earlier this year calling out coastal First Nations, the Great Bear Initiative group, saying that they operate more like a polished political advocacy outfit funded by foreign anti-resource interests than a straightforward representative of the actual nation. They hit back hard. They called it disinformation and hypocrisy because your own company had previously highlighted their carbon work. As a businessman who actually built something in this province, and why not just be brutally honest, Yuri, with people? If you want to do business in this province, develop resources, build housing, create jobs, it's the reality on the ground. You have to talk to these people and you have to signal to these nations in that way. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so I put this in one of the categories that we talked about when we introduced this. Is
Yeah.
so we gave money to the Coastal First Nations for a very specific initiative, right? That was around environmental stewardship.
Yeah.
I didn't know.
Oh,
I assumed that Coastal First Nations represented all of the Coastal First Nations. How naive of me. Fair enough. But I assumed. Bad on me. I should have done more investigation. I didn't. Bad on me.
right.
I didn't know they took millions and millions and millions of dollars from US donors opposed to resource development in BC. And I couldn't have known that because there is no requirement that they tell me. And there is no place I can find that information because they don't have to disclose it. And so when I made that video, my video was just to say, you should disclose it. If you're
Right.
going to lobby in British Columbia, you should have to disclose where your money comes from. And of course, they went on a rant at me and called me all sorts of things. But they didn't refute one thing I said.
Respectfully. No, fair enough. And thanks for addressing that. I have the same question for the whole DEI apparatus. We see it in government, universities, big projects. You've watched how these, as a business person, you've watched how these frameworks have actually put out and played out in the real world. What have you, like when this was introduced, I think that you, as a business person, have seen how this was introduced, the intent of how it was introduced, and how this has played out. What are your thoughts on this DEI system and what should we do with it now?
Look, Dan, I think a lot of these kind of things started off well, right? And I would tell you, I think that, I believe there should be more women in the workforce. If that's DEI, I guess. But I think they started somewhere and they've arrived somewhere else.
Right.
Like Soji in schools started as an anti-bullying platform, right? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
6'2" and 200 pounds now. I don't get bullied easily. When I was a kid, I was relentlessly bullied, like beaten up all the time. I know what it feels like to be afraid to go to school every day, afraid to go to school every single day. I don't want any kid to feel that way. But that's not what Soji is anymore, right? So these programs have all evolved to a place that's not where they started. It's not where we all signed up for to be involved in it. And now whenever we try and say, hang on a sec, this started here and it's now here. I was okay with here. I'm not okay with here. Then we get it thrown in our face as if we're somehow against the fundamental principles. And when I say we need to repeal Soji, I get told, well, you're in favor of bullying. What? Like, don't be ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. I will defend kids. I'll stand in front of kids being bullied. But I'm not in favor of the things that are being taught to kids, and I'm not in favor of parents losing their rights.
Thank you, and I'm glad you brought that, the parents, your rights, and I think that you're absolutely right that you've talked about the evolution of this party, conservatism, this party, and this party, like it or not, I would believe is an indictment of the BC Liberal Party, the BC United Party. Bruce Banman went on question period when he crossed the floor with John Rustad, and had asked David Eby to read aloud the literature that was in these schools, and he refused. He refused, and that tells you everything you need to know about what the stuff that they're teaching in our schools. But more importantly, you threaded a needle that is very important to myself, is that when you look at SOGI as a program, I have kids that are going into school and into the public education system, and I was very concerned about this ideology that they were going to be teaching my kids. I was like, what tools as a parent, as a stakeholder for my children? You got to recognize that I'm the one that keeps this child alive. When she's sick, I'm the one that takes her to the hospital. I'm the one that's worrying about whether or not she's going to make it through to the next day. And now you're telling me, as a stakeholder into my child's well-being, I have no say about this ideological nonsense that you're pushing onto my children about their learning. It's a tool. It's not a part of the curriculum. I can't get my kids out of this program. And I think that that's the biggest fault of the Soji program. I believe that we need to learn about diverse views. Nobody's disputing that. I think you're right. Everyone needs to be, nobody should go to school and be bullied. I absolutely agree with that. But I also think that having the parents taken out of this program and having a say whether or not they want to have it be in this program, I think that that's the biggest travesty of all,
I
because
agree.
it says that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you and I are both dads, right? I got two little
Yeah,
kids as well. There's nothing more precious to you than your children. There's also nothing more precious than you sharing your values with your children, right? So at school, we should be teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, all of those things. We should teach kids to be kind. We should teach kids to be tolerant and understanding. And parents should teach values at home.
absolutely,
Full stop. Full
absolutely.
stop. End of the discussion.
Yeah, I think that we've kind of come from a path where I don't even think they grade our children anymore, and everyone gets a participation ribbon. And I think that's one thing that really strikes me about your story is, and even you watching you on this election campaign is that we're not teaching our children to fail, and I think that that's it's a travesty in my opinion, because if you don't learn how to fail, you'll learn how to never try, and you'll learn never to learn from your mistakes. Like, I'd imagine you've made like hundreds of mistakes, like in this, from starting your businesses to right now. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, that's how you improve, right? Unless somebody tells you what you're good at and what you're not good at, how do you know what to work on? So, like we see, like school, and we don't use grades in school anymore, right? Nobody's an A, B, C, or D, or F. It's all words that confuse parents, right? And I hear that in every community. I don't know how my kid's doing. How am I supposed to help them if I don't know what areas they need to improve on? Right? When my kid comes home with a D in math, I know I better help my kid in math, right? So mom or dad, whoever's better at math, is going to sit down next to the kid and help them with their math homework every night. Or Uncle Jim, or whoever's good at math in the family, or neighbor, or neighbor's kid, or you're going to find help for your kid who's got a D in math. But if you don't have a letter grade, how do I know? So now I've got my kid growing up through school, and I don't know whether they're good at anything or not good at anything. How do they know what they're good at, right? We all through life realize we've got some strengths and we got some weaknesses. How do I know what my weaknesses are if nobody's scoring me?
Right.
So I
No,
think
absolutely. Well, how do you like, and then when you go to the workforce, where I'm sorry, but whether or not you produce, like, fundamentally is going to affect you. How do you become better once you're out of the nest? And I think that that's the biggest thing that we're taking away from our children is we're not giving them skills to succeed, to be independent. I think that we're breeding a generation that thinks that what happened during COVID, that the government's going to bail you out. That's the norm, but unfortunately, it's not. Like, that's just not a sustainable form of government. So, thank you, Yuri. I don't want to keep you any longer. I know that you've got places to go.
thanks,
Um, I appreciate you coming on today, and
thanks,
you
Dad.
doing this the right way. You give it, you also get it, and I appreciate you taking the hits and answering the questions, Yuri. So, respect to you. You came on here, no handlers, just a real conversation, and you've made your case. You've
Thanks,
come
Mike.
from the outside, the political class, arguing the business experience, the execution, the coalition building, and what this moment demands. Yuri, do you have any last words?
Just I think as members go to vote, like this is going to be probably the most critical leadership race, maybe in BC history. Right? We have the opportunity to be the next government, or we have the opportunity to go bankrupt as a province. Right? 4 more years of the NDP, and we're done. So what I would say to you as you go and think about who you're going to vote for is think about who can win the next general election, who can unite the right. That is the only answer to this question. That's it. That's what you have to do.
Yuri, thank you for joining us. And to everyone watching, this is The Opposition with Dan Knight. Stay sharp, stay engaged, and we'll see you on the next one. And if you are not a member of the BC Conservative Party, join and get a membership. Your vote is going to probably determine the next premier of this province. Yuri, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.